Welcome to today's episode of Come On Guys, It Can't Just Be Me with Naomi. Getting into it. It can't just be me that notice that some voices dominate the conversation while others get ignored. What if the very language we use is designed to keep some people silent? Today, we're diving into a powerful theory that explains why this happens. As Griffin, Ledbetter, and Sparks explain in their 2022 book, A First Look at Communication Theory, Cromray's muted group theory states that man-made language aids in defining, depreciating, and excluding women. Because men have primarily shaped language, women frequently struggle to make their voices heard in the public sphere. It is explained that Cromray starts with the assumption that women perceive the world differently from men because of women's and men's different experience and activities rooted in the division of labor. My definition of muted group theory is that because women and men have different life experiences, especially when it comes to power and expectations, they develop different ways of understanding the world. And the problem is that the dominant language system does not reflect women's experiences. It often excludes or diminishes them. The idea of women as a muted group was first proposed by Oxford University social anthropologist Edwin Ardner. In his monograph, Belief in the Problem of Women, first presented in 1968 and officially published in 1972, Ardner noted the strange tendency of many ethnographers to claim to have cracked the code of a culture without ever making any direct reference to the half of society made up of women. He observed that women's voices were absent, not because they weren't speaking, but because their perspectives didn't match the dominant code of communication used by men. Soon after, Cheris Cromray, a feminist scholar and professor of speech communication and sociology at the University of Illinois, took this idea and applied it to communication studies. According to Cheris Cromray and the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network's 2021 article titled Muted Group Theory, A Tool for Hearing Marginalized Voices, this second iteration of muted group theory that is credited to Cromray applies muted group theory to gendered communication studies, arguing that since accepted language practices have been constructed primarily by men in order to express their experiences, women have thus been muted. Muted group theory was first introduced around 1972-1975 by British anthropologist husband-wife couple Edwin and Shirley Ardner at Oxford University. While originally developed within the field of anthropology, the theory explored how dominant social groups shape language. The theory later evolved in the United States, where Cheris Cromray recognized its relevance to feminist theory and communication studies. In 1981, she expanded muted group theory into the field of communication, arguing that language systems primarily reflect male experiences, leaving women at a disadvantage. Cheris Cromray served on the faculty of Illinois, held various roles at the University of Oregon, and was international dean at the International Women's University in Hamburg, Germany. Muted group theory was developed to understand why women's voices are systematically excluded or misunderstood in language, and to challenge the power imbalances reflected in communication practices. Edwin Ardner noticed this issue in anthropological research, where male ethnographers would claim to understand a culture while completely overlooking women's perspectives. As explained in the 2021 article Muted Group Theory, A Tool for Hearing Marginalized Voices, previously referenced, he argued that women are at a disadvantage in expressing concerns unless their views are presented in a form that is acceptable to men. In their 2022 textbook, A First Look at Communication Theory, Griffin and colleagues explain that when Cromray began her research career, she conducted a systematic study of the way that women were portrayed in cartoons. Women in cartoons were typically emotional, apologetic, or wishy-washy, while in contrast, men spoke directly and confidently. She noted that women's cartoon dialogue was vague and full of unnecessary adjectives like nice, pretty, cute, etc., while male characters had more forceful, simple statements. As Cromray put it, when women objected to this portrayal of them in media, they were often told that they had no sense of humor. And that kind of dismissal, she argued, is part of what keeps women's voices muted in society. In a first look at communication theory by Griffin, Ledbetter, and Sparks, the authors use this example to illustrate muted group theory and to highlight how even personal hobbies and behaviors can be redefined through a male-dominated lens. This example is from Elizabeth, a graduate student at Purdue University studying critical rhetoric. Quote, "I am a passionate knitter. In the dominant communication code, knitting is associated with domestic women. I cannot count the number of times men have made jokes or comments about me preparing to be a good wife or looking for a husband while I am knitting. But I knit because I enjoy it. I love working with my hands, and knitting makes a good change from schoolwork. My choice to knit has nothing to do with finding a husband or preparing to be a housewife." Still, even though knitting is an activity primarily engaged in by women, it is men who define its meaning. Close quote. This example illustrates muted groups theory's central claim that dominant groups define social meanings in ways that silence marginalized perspectives. Muted group theory is also particularly relevant in professional settings, where women often face pressure to modify how they speak or present themselves. For example, women may be told to smile more or don't sound too aggressive, while men who are using the same tone and behaving the same way are seen as confident or assertive. Muted group theory explains how these double standards reflect a communication system that is built around male norms. And in my personal experience as a woman, I often feel the pressure to conform and come off as agreeable even when I disagree on a topic. I feel the need to set clear boundaries regarding my personal life so that I am taken seriously. My male counterparts are able to say what they want, and oversharing on their part comes off as funny and personable, while for myself and many other women, it is seen as attention-seeking and unprofessional. Muted group theory examines how language reflects social power, often making it difficult for women to express themselves. Researchers use this theory to examine how language, media, and social expectations are shaped by male-centered, male-dominated perspectives and narratives, which in turn determine whose voices get to be heard. Muted group theory reminds us that language isn't neutral. It's a reflection of power, of who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets overlooked. When we question who built the language we use and who it serves, we start creating space for new voices, new stories, and new definitions. After discussing muted group theory, I hope that it wasn't just me that noticed some voices dominate the conversation.